Bienvenidas to Latina Literati, the channel for Latinas and the Latina family. If you like to read, travel, learn about people, learn about amazing women in history, then you've come to the right place. So happy to have you with us today because we are going to take you with us to Baja, California, Valle de Guadalupe. A wonderful place if you're anywhere in the area to go for a weekend. Today we're going to talk to you about the history. We're going to talk to you about the Kiliwa Nation, the indigenous people who have inhabited northern Baja, California. And we're going to take you along to visit some of the wineries and restaurants that are there for you to enjoy. So I think it's really important to begin by always recognizing the indigenous people whose land we're currently dining on. The Kiliwa Nation has lived in Baja, California for over 11,000 years. Let me say that again. The Kiliwa Nation has lived in northern Baja, California for over 11,000 years. That's a long time. And so a little bit about the history of the Kiliwa Nation. They were hunters and gatherers, and they also were masters of roasting the agave into mezcal. They lived in familial units, patrilineal familial units. And in the 1500s, they have a first contact with the Spanish invaders. In 1775, the Dominicans establish a mission on their territory. And by the time Mexico has gained its independence from Spain in 1821, the Kiliwa Nation has been decimated. And so one of the wineries that we visited, Shekue, is dedicated to or tries to honor the indigenous Kiliwa Nation by naming their wines words in the Kiliwa language. The name in Kiliwa may mean woman or man or heart or love. And we thought that was a very interesting way to honor the indigenous people's language. The last survey that was done, there are only 5 or 6 individuals that still speak the Kiliwa Nation. And so we thought that the winery Shekwe, by honoring the language, at least some of the words, teaching them to us, we thought it was a wonderful way to share some of the history of Baja. The Kiliwa Nation, like most of the Pacific First Nations, wove willow baskets, and you can see some of those in el Museo de Arte Popular in la Ciudad de Mexico. So if you're in Mexico City, you can go to the Popular Art Museum and you can actually see Kiliwa willow baskets that have survived. So in 1834, a Spanish priest arrives in Mexico. His name was Felix Caballero. It's kind of ironic that his last name should be Caballero because Caballero in Spanish means gentleman. But he was not a gentleman, he was a Dominican priest, and he made a deal with the Mexican government. So for the span of his life, he would have this mission in the Kiliwa territory, and then after that, it would pass to the Mexican government. Because you recall, Mexico wins its independence from Spain in 1821, and this is 1834. So this is already, over a decade since Mexico has been independent from Spain. So that didn't last very long because within 6 years, by 1840, he has enslaved and mistreated the Kiliwa and other groups that are living there, and so they run him off, and he dies very soon after that. But the interesting thing about Felix Caballero is that he is supposedly the first that started planting grapes there. The other interesting detail is that when the Mexican government then takes possession of what was the mission of Nuestra Señora de Guadalupe in what is now the Valle de Guadalupe, they actually sell it to a splinter group of Russians who have left Russia, come down from Northern California, and there was a war between Japan and Russia, and they were running away from it. And so a splinter group of Russians start actually build the town of Nuestra Señora de Guadalupe, and supposedly are the first ones who start planting vineyards at a larger scale. They actually did it for brandy. By the 1920s, the Russians have left, and Mexican families are farming the Kiliwa Nation's land. So there are some rivers, but there are also underground aquifers. And so now when you speak to the farmers or the vintners, what they tell you is that all of their water comes from pozos or wells. So they don't have rivers any longer in the area. And so they're very creative with the way that they reuse water, and I thought that was of interest too in terms of the drip irrigation that's used. It's in the 1990s that the harvest fiestas begin, and so you have Mexican vintners starting to sell their wines locally and to make a name for themselves for delicious wines and also really good restaurants, which is kind of strange because it has been kept relatively rustic in that all around you are mountains and you have vineyards, and then all of a sudden you will come upon a restaurant that could very well receive a Michelin star at any moment. I mean, they're just, the level of cuisine that is available in Valle de Guadalupe is surprising. Really surprising. It's a foodie's paradise. So you get great wine and great food. I don't know what else you want, except of course some good books. So the winery Sheku that we visited had a wonderful tasting menu and paired with a slate cheese board, and the wines were great. We picked up a couple. The orange wine was the most interesting. Citrus fruits are grown in the area, and they make an orange wine which is perfect for dessert. So that was a surprise for us. Very delicious alternative to, I don't know, like limoncello or something. We had tasting lunch at Restaurante Lajas, and Restaurante Lajas is the Grand Dame, the kind of the original farm-to-table restaurant in Valle de Guadalupe. It's 21 years old, and our server was kind enough to take us on a tour of the gardens where they grow all of the produce that they use for their menu, for their daily menu, and they source all of their ingredients from the valle. You get a sense that there's a real camaraderie between the vintners and the farmers and people helping each other in terms of supplying the ingredients that they need to make their business a success. So I thought that was very, very nice as well. The food at Lajas was quite good. It was surprising. Again, a bit of a fusion. So there were some dishes that were perhaps Asian infused and perhaps European or Italian infused, but all of it was quite good, and we'll show you here some of the different dishes. And we had some really good wines from different vintners. So in Spanish, vintner or vineyard is vinícola. You'll see on the bottles that the names will say so-and-so vinícola. And they're much smaller than the vineyards that you're used to. For example, if you've been to any of the Northern California vineyards, they're relatively smaller, but they're very good, and we invite you. You should come to Valle de Guadalupe and enjoy some wonderful wines, amazing views, and just great people. I was completely overwhelmed, as always, by the welcoming nature of the people of Mexico. Now I'm going to get to my favorite part, book recommendations for all of you. In fact, in thinking about what books to recommend for this particular video, originally I was going to do, to honor Mexico and to honor Mexican authors, I was going to do like the top 10 books you have to read by Mexican authors. And then I thought, well, it's actually International Women's Day month, and let me focus on the women. Historically, one of the female authors from the last century, although she was born technically in Paris, she came as a toddler to Mexico. And she considered herself Mexican and had Mexican citizenship. So
we call her Mexican, and she's my tocaya, Elena Poniatowska, La Noche de Tlatelolco, which is the massacre of the students in the 60s by the Mexican government. It is leading up to what happens that evening, and then also some detailed accounts of what occurred. And so you recall that in the United States, you had the Kent State Massacre. The massacre of the students in Mexico City was kind of on the same par, basically demonstrations that then turned bloody by the government forces. So it's a book worth reading, and it teaches you a lot about the social currents at that time in the 60s in Mexico. I thought I would choose, after a serious one like that one, I thought I would choose kind of a light one. Laura Esquivel, we all know Agua para Chocolate, Water for Chocolate. There's actually a series of 3 books that she writes about the women in the family on both sides of the border. So that's the interesting thing. So if you haven't read all 3 or you've only seen the movie, read the books, because there's more detail in them and lots more going on, and really worth reading. And they're fun. They're light books. They're books to take on planes and things. The third author is Cristina Rivera Garza. Now, she's born in Tamaulipas, and then as a youngster goes to the United States. But again, she considers herself Mexican, so I'm just going to say she's Mexican. And recommend her book, Nadie Me Verá Llorar. And again, this is a kind of psychological thriller, suspense, historical narrative. It talks about not just one particular woman, but I won't give too much away, but the protagonist is a clerk who has suffered so much that he decides to do some kind of mindless work as the photographer at an insane asylum, and gets to know the different patients as they come in, and so meets a woman who changes his life. And so that's all I'll tell you. If you have not read Octavio Paz's El Laberinto de la Soledad, The Labyrinth of Solitude, really gets into the Mexican psyche. You have to read it. I mean, it's a classic. It's something. That's the only male author, although there are so many that I'm going to recommend today. But I'll leave, as always, in the description box links so that you can take a look at the books, consider them to read. But as always, I always recommend first going to your public library. If you don't have a library, then supporting your local bookstore, because those are our neighbors and those are people around us that we want to support. We always want to buy local. And if you don't have a local bookstore, or they may not have the volume, or you may not want to wait to order it, we like to recommend Better World Books, because for every $1 that you spend, they then use some of the funds they receive to donate literacy materials to communities that need it. As always, we wish you mucha salud, mucho cariño, felicidad, mucho amor. Gracias.